We pick up the story here a couple of chapters later, 2 Samuel 11. And David, at this point, has made it.
Yeah.
It's the spring of the year when a king's mind naturally turns to war.
Yeah.
It's the campaigning season is beginning.
Yeah.
But David has wised up and he sends the generals out to battle and he stays home.
Yeah.
And of course, when you stay home like that and have nothing much to do, you can get into all sorts of problems.
Yeah. Who knows what's going to happen when you simply look out your window? You might see something that catches your eye. And in this case, of course, he sees Bathsheba, right, bathing on the rooftop.
This story was obviously written to become a television special.
It certainly has that feel to it.
And it hasn't been done properly yet.
No, we're still waiting.
But yes. A lot of cliches, you might say, or at least stock motifs here. Mm-hmm. You know, the woman conveniently bathing, and we'll see a few other things now with the way he deals with her husband.
Yeah. So the key is, right, he spots her bathing on the roof.
Sends a state trooper
essentially to bring her to him, and he sleeps with her, and she becomes pregnant.
Yep.
And in some senses, we almost knew this was going to be the case. Right? There's the woman bathing on the roof may be something of a cliche, but in a context, Israelite context, right, a woman bathing is very often a purification ritual, very much one that is typical, in fact, required in the period directly after menstruation, which is aligned with, height of fertility. So she's bathing, and as soon as she's finished bathing and he takes her to him, we almost know there's going to be a baby coming from this, and indeed there is. And this worries David to a certain extent.
But now, of course, David is an honorable man. And so he decides it's time to call home Uriah the Hittite, the woman's husband.
Right, her husband Uriah is one of David's warriors. He has been out at war with Joab.
And David says to him, go down to your house and wash your feet.
Yes. Euphemism.
Yes.
Tis a euphemism.
Go home, relax, have a nice evening with your wife. But Uriah won't go.
Yeah.
And he says, why? How can I do that when my companions are out sleeping in tents on campaign?
Yes. David's honor is perhaps not quite authentic. Uriah out-honors David in every possible way in this story.
And he's an old-timer, in a way. I mean, he believes in the old-time religion. Mm-hmm. And I think part of it is that there are certain things you don't do the night before the game. Mm-hmm. And so he is not about to go sleep with his wife.
Right. David tries a couple of times.
And he tries a couple of times. He bends over backwards. Mm-hmm. But eventually, David yields to reality and sends Uriah back and gets him to carry a message. And this is another topos. We get this in Herodotus as well, where somebody who is about to be bumped off delivers the instructions to the person who is charged to do it.
Yeah.
And this is to be carefully staged. He doesn't just stab him. He just sends him up close to the wall and then pulls back and hangs him out to dry and leaves him to be killed.
Right. And the fact is, Joab and David are both willing to have a number of soldiers killed alongside Uriah, as long as Uriah is one of them. And the messenger who comes back with the news is sort of worried that David might be upset that so many soldiers have died, and everybody sort of is like, no, that's as long as Uriah died. It essentially says these things happen in war.
These things happen. Do not let this matter trouble you, for the sword devours now one and now another.
Right.
This can't be helped.
Yes.
Why does the story not end there?
Well, you have to understand, this is, of all of the deaths that happen around David, all of which are to his benefit, this one is the only one for which he is blamed. Right? The text is very clear that he's responsible for it. And whereas in the other ones, we get very much this, no, it wasn't me. Here, David is going to be directly confronted with what he did. again, by our occasional prophet Nathan.
Nathan, yes. And, I mean, this is, I think, in many ways a remarkable episode. Because Nathan hardly needs a special revelation from God to figure out what has happened here. That, Bathsheba, he presumably knows something's been going on there, and then when her husband conveniently dies, it isn't too difficult to read between the lines. What is difficult, I imagine, is to go confront the king about it.
Yeah. Because,
after all, David might very well have said to him, Nathan, would you please deliver a message for me to Joab? And, this would be a problem for prophets all the way down. But now, what's remarkable about Nathan is A, that he has the courage to do it, and B, the way he does it.
Yeah. David is not particularly good at self-reflection. I don't think is very willing to see fault in himself. But if you can tell David a good story about other people, he will identify the moral participants and come to the correct judgment, at which point you have to explain to him that, no, I was talking about you. And this happens in this very famous story, the very famous parable that Nathan tells about the rich man and the poor man and the lamb.
One of a small number of parables in the Hebrew Bible, but a very good one. Maybe you might say a little overdone. The poor man who has only the one little ewe lamb that he keeps in his lap and lets drink out of his cup in most unhygienic manner. And when the rich man wants a meal, he won't take from his own stall. He goes and takes the poor man's little ewe lamb. And David becomes angry and says, who is this man? And
the man is you.
And you are the man.
Yeah. At which point, of course, again, having had it explained to him, David feels some great remorse. But Nathan's not done, right? Because Nathan is now going to tell him what the punishment is for this this particular act.
David said to Nathan, I have sinned. I think probably the only time he says this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now the Lord, Nathan said to David, now the Lord has put away your sin, since you have confessed it. I suppose you shall not die. Nevertheless, because by this deed you have utterly scorned the Lord, the child that is born to you shall die. Okay, first of all, is this fair?
In some senses, this gets at this very constant question in the Hebrew Bible of transgenerational punishment, right? Is it fair for a child to die for a parent's sin? In this case, I have to say, my sense is they don't consider the child to actually be a person quite yet, right? Yeah. The child dying is not really punishment for the child; it's punishment for David. It's deflection of David's death penalty onto someone else. But there's something strange about that, right? As if God requires some sort of death for death.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could get good basis for that God requires some kind of death for a murder, if go back to Genesis for that. It reminds me of an episode that I read about recently in Afghanistan, a few years ago, where a woman, somebody's daughter was raped, and the elders decreed that therefore the daughter of the perpetrator should be raped. Now, this is, it's tribal logic, if you will, that you're not thinking the child doesn't have any rights in themselves.
Yeah.
But now, there's probably some other complications going on in this story here.
Yeah, we've got issues here of essentially paternity. Right, whose child is it? Right, that was David's concern from the get-go, and we have here, again, the Nathan, Bathsheba, David trio and how they're negotiating power. David's son, that is that first child, it could possibly have been Uriah's. It's possible. Who would know?
Yeah.
But if that child is taken out of the picture, we know that the next one will definitively be, because Uriah is now dead, will definitively be David and Bathsheba's. And so Nathan decrees that first child shall die, and the second baby that is born to David and Bathsheba, that one's going to be Solomon.
Yeah. So when then, he grieves for the child for a while, and after a while they tell him, no, come on, you got to get over this. And he says, no, he's dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him. He will not return to me.
This is one of the most wonderful emotional moments, really, right? And turns mourning rituals on their head. David, in a very understandable, sort of humanizing kind of way, right? David mourns while the child is sick. Right, but when the child dies,
that's right. Yes,
he gets dressed. He gets dressed again, and they all sort of say, "What are you doing? Right, you got it backwards.
Exactly.
You got it backwards."
Yes.
But he rightly says, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing more to be done now.
Yeah. And so at that point, then, what's the proper way to console both yourself and the mother of the child?
Have another one.
Have another one. So he goes back. He consoled his wife Bathsheba, went to her, lay with her, and she bore a son, and he named him Solomon.
Yeah.
And so this will set the stage eventually. There's a strand of these stories that's obviously defending the legitimacy of Solomon, establishing the legitimacy. Why do they tell the story of the adultery with Bathsheba at all?
I mean, I think that it is part of the Solomonic agenda. Right, we have been reading a lot of pro-Davidic propaganda. Yeah. And then we come across this moment, again, where like the one death that he is responsible for, and he does something terrible, and he is, he admits to being a sinner. Yeah. We have to recognize that in the ancient world, there was a very common program. When you became king, it was a good thing to sort of denigrate your predecessor to a certain degree. And this is a moment where Solomon can both say, David wasn't so perfect, and also legitimize himself as David's descendant. So I see this as sort of doing these two things at once, and this happens. We have inscriptions contemporaneous with this in which kings will say, my father wasn't quite able to do everything right, but I am. Right?
Yeah.
And so again, doing both things at once, right? I'm better than him, but I am the rightful royal descendant.
Yeah. Would it have caused anybody to question whether Solomon was really a legitimate child?
This story?
Yeah. I mean, so long as he has actually so long as Solomon is begotten after Uriah is dead, and after he has taken Bathsheba, so that they're properly.
I think what this story may suggest is the need to prove Solomon's paternity, right?
Yeah.
That is the reason you tell a story like this, in which the issue of paternity is raised at all.
Yeah.
I mean, paternity comes up in not a single other king in the Hebrew Bible. Nobody else is concerned about it. But suddenly this one time it comes up, you sort of have to say, well, somebody must have been concerned about it. And it's not surprising, right? Saul had no father. His father wasn't king before him. David's father wasn't king before him. Solomon was maybe the first one to have to say, I actually am, right? This is a legitimate dynastic shift.
And then, of course, a lot of what follows after this will have to do with the question of who is it. Because it wasn't, even, if you establish that he is David's son.
He's not David's eldest son.
You've got people in line before him.
That's absolutely right.
And now you could also say, I think, that this marks a turning point in the career of David.
Yeah.
Things don't go so well from here on out.
Yeah, he may be on the crown for quite a while longer.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be easy, right? He doesn't have a sort of long period of triumph in which he reigns in peace.
Yeah.